9th Commandment says, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbour." And here is the Heidelberg Catechism's explanation of that in Lord's Day 43. What is required in the 9th Commandment? That I bear false witness against no man, nor falsify any man's words, that I be no backbiter, nor slanderer, that I do not judge nor join in condemning any man rashly or unheard, but that I avoid all sorts of lies and deceit, as the proper works of the devil, unless I would bring down upon me the heavy wrath of God. Likewise, that in judgment and all other dealings I love the truth, speak it uprightly and confess it, also that I defend and promote as much as I am able the honour and good character of my neighbour. Psalm 15, which we read together in connection with this Lord's Day, David asks the urgent question, who shall abide in the tabernacle of God? As David is in the tabernacle and viewing the various people there coming for public worship, he sought to ask this question: what are the characteristics of those who have fellowship with God? And he answers that question in the psalm in various ways. First, they walk uprightly, which means that the general tenor of their lives is straight and even and level and in conformity to the commandments of God. Second, they are upright in their dealings with their neighbour. They do not oppress or exploit their neighbour. Verse 5. Third, they are reliable people who can be trusted to do what they promised they would do, even if that costs them dearly. Verse 4. And fourth, they choose their friends from among the godly, those who fear the Lord, and they despise, contemn those who are evil. They will not be friends with evil men. And these are some of the qualities or characteristics of someone who is in fellowship with God. And especially important in Psalm 15 is the way in which a friend of God, a true worshipper of God, uses his tongue. He is not the kind of person who comes to the tabernacle and worships Jehovah God with his tongue, singing praises to his God with his tongue, and then misuses his tongue throughout the week. And Psalm 15 mentions several uses of the tongue, 3 in particular, which are true of the man who truly worships Jehovah and dwells with Jehovah in his tabernacle. First, no backbiting. Second, no taking up a reproach against one's neighbour. And third, always speaking the truth in the heart. What of our tongue? How do we use our tongue throughout the week? Is our tongue always employed in the speaking of the truth and only the truth? Or is our tongue involved in speaking evil against our neighbours? Is our tongue involved in eagerly passing on gossip, evil reports about our neighbours? These are the kinds of things that Lord's Day 43 explains are against the 9th Commandment. Let's look then at the 9th Commandment. The 9th Commandment governing our speech. The 9th Commandment governing our speech. Look first at the requirement, then at the prohibition, and finally at the motivation. The Heidelberg Catechism identifies the positive calling of the 9th Commandment in these words: love the truth and speak it uprightly. We must therefore the truth. And to love the truth, we must know what the truth is. We must know what the truth is concerning God, concerning ourselves as sinners, concerning all things. Because God is the God of truth. He is the only true God. And His Son, Jesus Christ, is the way, the truth, and the life. His kingdom is the kingdom of truth. His Spirit is the Spirit of truth. And His Word is the Word of truth. Therefore, all truth has its source in God. To keep the 9th commandment, therefore, one must know and love everything which God has revealed to be true in His Word. One must know and love the true God, His Son, His Holy Spirit, His kingdom, His Word, and all attacks upon the truth, all false doctrine, all heresy, is an attack upon God Himself and is a violation of the 9th commandment. And so to keep the 9th commandment, we must hear the truth. We must promote the truth. And we must also oppose the lie. You cannot therefore keep the 9th commandment and at the same time attend or support a church which preaches and promotes lies. Lies about God. Lies about salvation. Lies about Jesus Christ. Lies about the Bible. Lies about how a Christian is supposed to live in the midst of the world. You cannot be a member or support a church where the minister lies. And he lies because he has subscribed to certain creeds and confessions, but really doesn't believe in those creeds or confessions. Or where the other office bearers are liars. The elders and the deacons don't believe the truth either, and where the members of the church do not care one whit about what the truth is or what the truth may not be. We're simply a place where people come together who are somewhat religious to think about God and to pat themselves on the back for being religious and nice and friendly people. You cannot, I say, keep the 9th commandment and be part of or support an ecclesiastical body such as that. Truth begins in the heart. And Psalm 15 verse 2 says, He speaketh the truth in His heart. He loves the truth. The truth is part of Him, you could say, and that truth will flow out of His heart and appear on His lips and on His tongue. One who loves the truth has a second calling. Not only to love the truth, but to speak it uprightly and to confess it. And this is especially important in a court of law, which really is the context of the 9th commandment. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbour really belongs in the first place in a court of law. And a court of law is an especially solemn occasion. Someone has been accused of a crime, and you are called to be a witness. And you are to say what you saw or what you heard. And to be a faithful witness, you must say exactly what you saw and exactly what you heard. You must say what is in accordance with reality, what actually happened. Not make things up. Not exaggerate things, but say exactly what happened. And upon your testimony in such a court of law, the entire case might depend. Your testimony might mean the difference between acquittal for this person or condemnation for this person. This person might go to prison or be put to death because of your testimony. And so it is a solemn occasion, which is why They will put you under oath. Do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? And that is why, too, there is a law against perjury in most civilized countries. Perjury is not simply lying. Perjury is lying under oath in a court of law. And a perjurer, someone guilty of this crime of perjury, is severely punished, even under modern law. You can go to prison for being a false witness, for being a perjurer in a court of law. And this was also true in the Old Testament. In Deuteronomy chapter 19, for example, we read of the punishment which would be meted out upon a false witness. Deuteronomy chapter 19, beginning at verse 16. If a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord, before the priests and the judges, which shall be in those days. And the judges shall make diligent inquisition. They shall investigate, in other words. And behold, if the witness be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, then shall ye do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. So shalt thou put the evil away from among you. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you. And thine eye shall not pity, but life shall go for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. So in other words, if you are a witness in a murder trial, and the penalty is death in such a trial, and you speak false witness and cause your brother be put to death falsely for the crime of murder, and it be found out, you yourself will be put to death because you wrongfully caused the death of that neighbor by testifying falsely against him. That's the seriousness of this commandment in a court of law. But the commandment does not simply apply to the court of law. We must speak the truth. We must never bear false witness. We must speak the truth in every situation. In the home, a husband and wife must always be truthful to one another, and so must parents be truthful to their children, and children to their parents. We must be truthful at work. We must not deceive our customers or our boss or anyone else in our workplace. We must always fill out our forms, such as tax returns and so on, with honest and complete answers. We must always tell our teachers at school the truth, not make up stories about the dog eating our homework and so on. And the rule and the principle is never say anything to anyone with the intention to deceive. To deceive. And this is important with respect to our neighbor. Thou shalt not bear false witness against, notice that word, against thy neighbor. Positively, this means, as the Catechism says, that I defend and promote as much as I am able the honour and good name of my neighbour. This means we only speak about our neighbour that which is true and serves his good character or good name or reputation. And a man's good name or reputation is very important to him. Proverbs 22 verse 1 says, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches. And Ecclesiastes 7 verse 1 says, a good name is better than precious ointment. And one's name or reputation is his character, the way in which he is known, by those around him, by his family, by his friends, by society, by his workmates, or whoever they might be. And a man's name depends upon his own behavior. What is your name? When someone says, your name, do they say, oh, he is a reliable person. He is an honest person. He is a kind and generous person. Or do they say about you, he is a lazy, irresponsible, nasty person? That is your name or your reputation. And usually, names and reputations are well deserved by the one who has them. When a person can be meticulous in his behavior and very careful in how he lives, and become the victim of a smear campaign. Or a person may do something embarrassing which could potentially harm his good name and become the victim of a gossip who spreads that indiscretion throughout the neighborhood, trumpets it throughout the world. And our calling under this 9th commandment is to protect the good character of our neighbor. And so, if we are approached by someone, a gossip, who says to us, I know something about so-and-so. Wait until you hear what so-and-so did. And they're eager to pass on to you this piece of juicy gossip. You must ask 3 questions before you allow that person to continue. First, is this true? Where did you hear this piece of information? Is it a reliable source? Always stop your would-be gossip and ask that question. Where did you hear about it? Are you sure it's true? Have you checked the facts? Second, is it necessary? Is it necessary for you to tell me this? Is it necessary for me to know this? Even if it is true, is it necessary? Is it necessary for us to repeat it to other people? Do they need to know this? And what is your motive for telling me this? That's the second question. And third, would the repetition of this piece of gossip, even if it is true, would it be helpful or would it be destructive to the reputation of my neighbour? What would be the effect upon my neighbour's character if I told someone this piece of information? Would he look worse or would he look better? Would others think highly of him? Or would they think low thoughts about him? Would I think highly about him? And if the information is not true, not necessary, and not helpful, we have a calling under the 9th commandment, and it's this, to say to our would-be gossip, stop right there. I don't want to hear any more about it. And you should not be saying anything about this. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about something much more edifying instead. And those rules apply also to what we write on the internet, what you post on Facebook, what you send as a text message, what you email to someone, say forwarding an email. Is it true? Is it helpful? And what effect will it have upon my neighbour? And is it necessary for people to know? So we are called to love our neighbour, especially in his reputation. So if we hear someone saying something evil against our neighbour, we stop our ears. We refuse to listen. And we rebuke that person and defend our neighbour, even if that means embarrassment for us in the midst of a group of friends. Suddenly the conversation turns to gossip. Let's talk about what so-and-so did. Let's laugh about what so-and-so did. Ask the 3 questions and then tell the people, no, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about something else. And especially if it's lies, rebuke that person. You may not say that about him, because what you say about him is false. I know that what you say about him is false. Stop that gossip. Stop that chatter. And shame on you for such speech. And do not expect, beloved, to be popular with your friends and co-workers and acquaintances if you rebuke people in such a manner. But that, beloved, is our calling. And imagine what kind of world we would live in if people kept the 9th Commandment in the way I have outlined. How that would utterly transform the publishing world, the world of the internet, the advertising world, the business world, and the world of politics. Quite frankly, most of the newspapers would be empty if people were to keep the 9th Commandment in this way. Or at very least, the journalists would have a lot more work to do to find sensible and edifying material to put into their newspapers, because much of what appears in magazines and newspapers today is simply gossip, dedicated to tearing down the character of one's neighbour, one's celebrity neighbour, usually. Idle gossip and tittle-tattle, which is mostly not true, usually not helpful, and damaging to the character and reputation of such neighbours. But that's the kind of stuff that the vast majority of people are interested in reading about today. It distracts them too from the important stories going on in the world. Let's talk about how so-and-so got so-and-so pregnant, instead of worrying about important issues like war and what's going on in the government and so on. And every time someone runs for political office, the press starts to dig up dirt on him or her. None of it's helpful, much of it's unimportant, and lots of it's untrue, but it sells. It's effective, and it very often destroys the political career of such a person. And the internet is a terrible offender about this as well. Online discussion groups, Facebook, and many other sites can be used simply for gossip and idle tales to ruin the reputation of the neighbour. And here, beloved, are a few texts about this. Listen to God's word on this matter. Leviticus 19 verse 16. Thou shalt not go up and down as a tale bearer. Someone carrying stories, as a tale bearer among thy people. Proverbs 18 verse 8. The words of a tale bearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. Proverbs 20 verse 19. He that goeth about as a talebearer revealeth secrets. Therefore meddle not with him that flattereth with his lips. Proverbs 26 verse 20. Where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. And some from the New Testament. Here's a condemnation of various women in the church of Paul's day. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. And finally, 1 Peter 4 verse 15. But let none of you suffer as a murderer, or as a thief, or as an evildoer, or as a busybody in other men's matters. So the positive calling is to protect and honour the good reputation of your neighbour by loving and always speaking the truth to him and about him. commandment, however, is given to us in negative language. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. And so the 9th commandment forbids us to do certain things. And these sins, these dreadful sins, are mentioned in Lord's Day 43. First, there is the sin of slander. That I be no slanderer, we read. A slanderer is someone who speaks deliberate lies about a neighbor. Things which he or she knows are utterly untrue, and his or her motive is to destroy the reputation of that neighbor. Joseph was slandered by Potiphar's wife. And the consequence of that was that Joseph was thrown unjustly into prison. Naboth was slandered by Jezebel's paid false witnesses. And the consequences of that, Naboth was stoned to death, again, unjustly. Mephibosheth was slandered by Ziba, his servant, when David was fleeing from before the face of Absalom. Ziba came to him and said, "Oh, Mephibosheth, he now says that he no longer wants to be loyal to you, David." And then David gave to Ziba the land which formerly belonged to Mephibosheth, but Mephibosheth was unable to walk and go after David, and Mephibosheth was always loyal to David, and we discover that when David comes back after Absalom is dead. But Ziba took for himself the land of his master Mephibosheth by saying lies against Mephibosheth. And Jesus Christ himself, he was slandered as well. They called him a glutton and a wine-bibber. They said about him that he casts out devils by the prince of the devils, even Beelzebub. And the slanderer so despises and detests his neighbor that he desires that other people will think and speak evil about that neighbor, and to accomplish that goal he spreads lies about his neighbor. At the same time, the slanderer desires to enhance his own reputation, tearing down other people so you can build yourself up in the eyes of others. And the slanderer can be ruinous upon a neighbor. Joseph cast into prison, Naboth put to death. People can be driven even to suicide because of slanderers. And terrible punishments can come upon those who are victims of slander because they have no way to defend themselves. But God will punish the slanderer. Second, there is the sin of rash judging. I do not judge nor join in condemning any man rashly or unheard. That is, to condemn a neighbor without giving him a fair hearing. Someone comes to you and says, "I heard that so-and-so did something terrible. Wait till you hear what it is." And instead of stopping that person, as I have said, you listen eagerly to what that person says, and you immediately agree with him that what he has said is true, and to make matters worse, you tell other people about it. You think, well, of course he did that. That's just the kind of thing that a person like that would do. You don't check out the facts. You don't give the person the benefit of the doubt. You simply judge that person rashly and unheard. And Proverbs 18:17 says, "He that is first in his own cause seemeth just, but his neighbour cometh and searcheth him." Do not judge rashly or unheard. Do not jump to conclusions. Hear both sides of the story before you make an evaluation about your neighbour, and give your neighbour an opportunity to explain himself before you go around telling other people what that neighbour allegedly has done. Then there's the sin of falsifying another man's words, which is to twist what another man said in order to misrepresent him. And Christ was victim of this as well. Christ said in John 2, "Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I shall raise it up." And those words were so twisted at his trial that they became, he said he would destroy the temple, which of course he had never said. And this sin is a very common sin and very easy for us to commit. You can twist a man's words by changing them ever so slightly to make them say something which he never intended to say. Or you can quote a man out of context. Or you can exaggerate something that a man said to make it sound worse than what he actually meant. Or you can remove some part of the sentence which qualified what he said to make it sound worse than what he actually meant. And all of this is done to harm the reputation of the neighbour, to make him look bad, and again to make you yourself look better. Add to those terrible sins the sins of backbiting and the spreading of gossip and evil reports. Backbiting. That is to speak evil behind someone's back. The word suggests that. Even when that evil speaking is factually true. Slander is speaking evil, which is a deliberate lie. Backbiting might even be true. That word is very expressive in the English. The idea of someone coming up behind someone's back, not to their face, but behind their back, and taking a bite of flesh out of that person's back with the obvious intention of hurting them. A backbiter is an evil, malicious, cowardly person who will not give his victim the opportunity to defend himself. And backbiters love to hear about the faults of others, and they believe immediately what they hear from other gossips, are eager to spread such news, and do so out of malice or pride to destroy their neighbour's reputation and to enhance their own. And one of the qualities of a person who will dwell with Jehovah, according to Psalm 15, is that he does not backbite with his tongue. Verse 3. He does not make the faults of others the subject of his idle chatter or of his mockery or amusement. He does not take pleasure in the sins of others and enjoy to tell other people about their faults. And Psalm 15 verse 3 also speaks about one who does not take up a reproach against his neighbour. A reproach is something shameful or dishonourable, something which would show our neighbour up in a bad light. And we are called here not to take up that reproach. And that goes further than not slandering our neighbour. The figure in Psalm 15 goes something like this. A man is walking along the road and he finds something on his path which is a reproach against his neighbour. If people found out about this reproach, his neighbour's reputation would be damaged. What does he do with that reproach? Or perhaps that man meets another one of his friends, a neighbour of his, and this neighbour is carrying the reproach in his arms and is eager to pass that reproach on, a bit like a relay race. Take the baton and pass it on. What does that man then do when he's faced with such a choice concerning passing on a reproach. Psalm 15 says, he does not take up a reproach against his neighbor. He does not carry it literally. He does not lift it up from the ground and carry it and display it to all of his neighbors. He does not take it like the relay runner from the person behind him and pass it on to the person in front of him. He refuses to do so because he knows it is a reproach against his neighbor. Instead, he seeks to bury it. He will not tell anyone about it. He seeks to cover it up and only keep it between himself and his neighbor, but not tell anyone else who does not need to know. But the one who bears the reproach against his neighbor, he is the one who finds the reproach and eagerly and joyfully says, look what I found, it's a reproach against my neighbor. Let's look at it, let's examine it, let's talk about it, let's laugh about it. That's someone who bears a reproach or taketh up a reproach against his neighbor. The godly man does not do that. He refuses, therefore, to do that. And the reason we refuse all lies, all deceit, all slander, all backbiting, all malicious gossip, is that these things, as Lord's Day 43 explains, are the proper works of the devil. If you ask, what language does the devil speak? Is it English? Is it French? Is it German? It's lying. Lying. That's the language of the devil. That is, you could say, his native tongue. The language in which the devil is most fluent. Lying. And we must not learn to speak the language of the devil. When the devil comes to us and tempts us, learn my language. We must say, no, I refuse to learn your language. I refuse to speak your unclean language. The devil was a liar from the beginning. And he is the father of lies, Jesus tells us in John chapter 8. And the devil is so fluent in the practice of lying because he's had much practice. From the very beginning, he has been lying. Lying has been his favorite device. And he is behind all the lying and deceit in the world today. Falsifying words, he's an expert at falsifying words. He did that in the Garden of Eden to Eve. Yea, hath God said. Slander and backbiting, an expert in that as well. Because his very first words, recorded for us in Genesis 3, are really slander and backbiting against God himself. Trying to paint the character of God in an evil light, to say to Adam and Eve, God is not the kind and generous and loving God that he makes himself out to be. He doesn't want you to have wisdom. He doesn't want you to be free. Listen to me, and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. And he's been slandering and he's been backbiting ever since. Think of how he slandered Job to God's face in chapter 1, saying about Job, oh Job, he only worships you because of all the good things he gets from you. He doesn't really love you from his heart, and if you take away all of his things, he will curse you to your face. He does that for every child of God. Slander, backbiting, accusing the brethren before God's face. And even when the devil speaks something which is factually accurate, he does so always with malice and evil in his heart. And how fitting, therefore, that the Greek word for devil and the Greek word for slanderer are the same, because the devil is the great slanderer. And the slanderer is a devil, a lying, deceitful, hypocritical, nasty, malicious devil. And the slanderer is doing the work of the devil for him. And the devil causes havoc and great damage among men and women by his work of slandering and lying, and persuading and tempting men and women to slander and backbite among themselves. Because take away truth, take away love, how can you have relationships, healthy relationships among human beings? You can't trust what a person says. How can a man and a woman live together in marriage if they're always lying and deceiving one another? How can you do business with people who are always lying and deceiving? How can you have a healthy relationship with your children or with your parents if you're always lying and deceiving? And how can you have healthy relationships in the church if people are lying and deceiving one another, backbiting, speaking evil against one another, slandering one another, and gossiping about one another? That is the destruction of the life of the church. And the devil rubs his hands in glee when Christians are guilty of these kinds of things. And this happens all the time in the church world. And we are guilty of this. We are victims of this as well. That Liberate Reformed Fellowship, they're extreme. They're unloving. Don't ever go there. Because those people are hyper-Calvinists. And that is said about us by people who never listen to our sermons, and they're available online to hear, who never visit our worship services to meet us and see what we're like, but who just simply listen to the rash judgments of others. And in the church, there are people who are whispering and gossiping and speaking evil behind people's backs, who are trying by their whispering and their slandering and their backbiting to undermine the work of the church, and they are doing the work of the devil for him. They speak against the minister, for example, and they say about the minister that he has evil motives. He's not really a very nice person. He's a hypocrite. And so they undermine the preaching of the gospel. Or they say about the elders or the deacons. Don't trust those people. And they undermine the authority of the elders and the deacons. And this kind of evil speaking, beloved, it ruins the peace of the church. It destroys churches. It has in the past destroyed churches. It causes schism and division. It turns the members of the church against one another. They live in distrust and they hate one another and they tear one another to pieces. And therefore, beloved, we must be very careful that we are not guilty of breaking the 9th Commandment. We have a motivation in Lord's Day 43 and in the entire Heidelberg Catechism. We have a motivation for keeping the 9th Commandment. And the first motivation is entirely negative. We do not want to, says the Catechism, to bring down upon us the heavy wrath of God. That's also included in Lord's Day 43. The heavy wrath of God comes down upon those guilty of breaking his law and guilty of breaking this 9th commandment. We might be tempted to think, though, but that's not the case. What we do with our tongues, that's not really that important. Surely God is more interested in murderers and rapists and child abusers and all those horrible people in the world. Why would he be angry with people who just say a few gossiping words from time to time? But God is angry with liars, with slanderers, with deceitful people, with backbiters, and with gossips. And he's angry because all lying and all deceit is the proper work of the devil and is an attack upon himself, because he is the God of truth. And all lies are the opposite of God, opposite of the God of truth. And God will not fellowship with liars and will not approve of liars. You see that in Psalm 15. The characteristics of one who will dwell with God are these: he that backbiteth not with his tongue, he that taketh up a reproach not against his neighbour, he that speaketh the truth in his heart. Those are the kinds of people who dwell with God in his tabernacle and on his holy hill. And it's very sobering to read, beloved, in Revelation 21 and 22, that in the list of those who have their part in hell, liars. Liars. Revelation 21 verse 8. But the fearful and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Revelation 22 verse 15. For without, or outside the blessed city of God, without are dogs, and sorcerers, and whoremongers, and murderers, and idolaters, and whosoever loveth, and maketh a lie. A lie. And if we want to be reminded, beloved, of how much God despises and abhors lying, we need only go to one place. I do not mean peer into hell and see the punishment meted upon liars for all eternity. I mean another place. Calvary. Christ, who is the truth, he was crucified on the cross for liars. Christ, in whose mouth was never found a lie, in whose mouth there was no guile, he suffered for liars. And for our lives, he was punished on that cross to deliver us from our lying, deceitful nature and our lives. Christ willingly called down upon himself the heavy wrath of God. And because of our lives, for every time that we have slandered someone, every time we have been guilty of backbiting, every time we have falsified another man's words, every time we have judged someone rashly or unheard, every time we have taken up a reproach against our neighbour and been guilty of malicious gossip, all of those sins fell upon Jesus Christ, and we are forgiven because he died for those sins. And by virtue of that death, and what that death gives to us, Christ puts into our hearts and lives his truth, so we can live in truth before his face. And we are transformed then from malicious, evil liars into those who love and practice the truth. And that, of course, is our motivation. It doesn't come out so much in Lord's Day 43, but remember, Lord's Day 43 is in the section entitled Gratitude. We speak the truth, we avoid lies, not ultimately because we are afraid of the wrath of God, not ultimately because we are afraid that we will lose our salvation if we do not keep this commandment, but because we are thankful. Thankful for the salvation which God has given us in Jesus Christ. Fear might motivate some people for a short period of time, but fear breeds hatred, and resentment. And if we try and keep the 9th Commandment because we have to, because we are afraid of God, very soon, very, very soon, we will want to give up. It will be too hard. We won't have the motivation because we don't really want to. We'll just be slaves. Slaves who work because we're afraid of being beaten by our masters, but not because we love our masters, not because we gladly and thankfully serve our master. Oh no, we will be thankful to be rid of our master if we are that kind of slave. But we have been redeemed, bought out of the slavery of the devil, and we are now enlisted into the service of Jesus Christ. We love him because he first loved us. We love our God, and we are grateful to our God who has delivered us from such terrible misery and sin and given unto us salvation through his blood. And therefore we want to show our gratitude towards God. We want to keep his commandments, and we do, by God's grace, begin to keep all of his commandments. And God gives us the power, by grace, to love the truth, to speak the truth, to confess the truth against all lies, and to love for God's sake and protect for God's sake the good name and reputation of our neighbour. Amen. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we confess that by nature we are liars. We confess too that we have, even in this past week, we have been guilty of this sin, of breaking this particular commandment. We ask, O Lord, that thou wilt cleanse our hearts, put truth in our inward parts, and cause us to speak and to love the truth, because Jesus Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, died for us on the cross to purchase us from sin and death, and to cause us to live unto him for Christ's sake. Amen.